The Baroness of Briarwood Hall, a Miss Marple mystery. Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins at Briarwood Hall, a grand estate standing silent at the edge of the countryside, wrapped in ivy, fog, and old rumors. Its owner, the Baroness, was known throughout the village as a woman of elegance and mystery, charming in public, yet strangely feared behind closed doors. For years, whispers surrounded the hall, locked rooms, late-night visitors, and secrets no servant dared discuss openly. But when a sudden tragedy strikes within the manor, Miss Marple begins to notice the small details others overlook. The portrait turned toward the wall, the missing key from the Baroness's study, and the uneasy silence that settles over Briarwood Hall after dark. The Baroness claimed she had nothing to hide. Miss Marple suspects otherwise. Because behind the grandeur of Briarwood Hall lies a truth someone has guarded for far too long. Before we uncover the secrets hidden within Briarwood Hall, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries on Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Baroness in Black. Briarwood Hall stood alone on the edge of the moor, big and grim against the evening sky, like a house that had swallowed too many secrets and never let them out again. Its stone walls were dark with rain, and its tall windows caught the last weak light like cold bits of glass. The villagers in St. Edmund's Lane had their stories about the place. Strange lights in empty rooms, bells ringing when no one pulled the rope. But most of all they spoke of the Baroness, Lady Eleanor Vale, the woman in black. Lady Eleanor had lived at Briarwood Hall for nearly 30 years, ever since her husband, Lord Vale, died under odd circumstances in the hunting woods. Some said it was bad luck, others weren't so sure. Since then she'd ruled the hall with a hard hand and a sharp eye, dressed always in black silk, carrying her silver-topped cane like a badge of war. She wasn't loved, respected perhaps, feared certainly. The letter arrived for Miss Marple on a wet Tuesday morning, folded neatly and sealed with dark wax. It was brief but troubling. Lady Eleanor wrote that she feared someone under her own roof wanted her dead. Not a thief, not an outsider. Family. The word had been underlined twice, the pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Miss Marple had seen enough in life to know that fear in old age was rarely foolish, especially when money was involved. By late afternoon, Miss Marple was climbing the long hill to Briarwood Hall in a hired motor car, watching the trees bend in the wind like they were whispering warnings. The hall greeted her with silence, no warm welcome, no cheerful firelight spilling from the windows, just stillness. The butler, Graves, opened the great oak door with the sort of face one wears at funerals. Inside, the place smelled of candle wax, damp wood, and old books, heavy smells, the sort that sat in the air and stayed there. Portraits of dead Vales lined the walls, each staring down as though keeping count of the living. Miss Marple noticed right away that the servants were nervous. A tray rattled in a maid's hand, a footman dropped his eyes too quickly. Something had happened here already, or was about to. Lady Eleanor received her in the drawing-room, seated beside the fire, though the room felt cold all the same. She looked thinner than Miss Marple expected, her pale hands gripping that silver cane like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes, sharp and grey, moved constantly toward the door. She wasted no time. Someone's been creeping about at night, outside my room. Slow steps, careful ones. Last night my bedroom door was open when I woke. I always lock it." Miss Marple listened quietly. Lady Eleanor leaned closer and lowered her voice. "And 3 days ago, my portrait in the West Hall was moved, just slightly, but I know my own house." That was the thing about old women, Miss Marple thought. They noticed shifts in the world others brushed aside. That evening the family gathered for supper. Harold Vale, the Baroness's nephew, broad-faced and sweating under his collar. Clara Vale, her niece, quiet but watchful. Dr. Fenwick, an old family friend with tired eyes and careful hands. They all smiled too much, spoke too lightly, like actors who'd forgotten half their lines. Then Lady Eleanor did something remarkable. She announced she'd changed her will. The room froze. Harold's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Clara stared into her wine. Dr. Fenwick coughed, but said nothing. Lady Eleanor smiled, thin as string. "Funny thing, money," she said. "It shows you people's real faces." That night the storm rolled in hard. Wind against the windows, rain on the roof, the sort of weather that makes an old house groan like it's alive. And just after midnight, a scream split through Briarwood Hall. Miss Marple rushed into the grand staircase hall to find Lady Eleanor lying broken at the bottom of the steps, her candle smashed beside her, her neck bent at a terrible angle. Dead. Her silver cane lay beside her, snapped clean in two. And as Miss Marple stared at it, one small thought crept into her mind. Old wood breaks, silver does not. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Wood. Morning came grey and bitter over Briarwood Hall, but the house felt darker than the sky outside. Death had a way of changing a place. It settled into the walls, into the carpets, into the way people spoke. The servants moved softer now, as though the house might hear them. Lady Eleanor's body had been taken away before dawn, and yet her presence still seemed to hang in every room like smoke after a fire. Inspector Graves arrived just after breakfast, coat damp from the rain, boots muddied from the drive. He was the practical sort, broad shoulders, sharp jaw, eyes that missed very little. He listened to everyone in turn, notebook in hand, though Miss Marple noticed how each story came too quickly, too neatly, as if practiced in the night. Harold claimed he'd been in the library, drinking whiskey alone until nearly 1 in the morning. Clara said she'd gone straight to bed after supper and heard nothing until the scream. Dr. Fenwick said he'd been reading in his room, unable to sleep. Smooth stories, and smooth stories, Miss Marple often thought, usually had rough edges hidden underneath. The staircase itself told its own tale. Miss Marple stood there for quite some time, looking at the polished wood, a narrow turn near the top, the candle wax still hardened on the floor. A fall, perhaps, that's what the inspector said. But Lady Eleanor had used that staircase every day for 20 years, a careful woman, a steady one, even with age. And then there was the cane. Miss Marple picked up the broken pieces when no one was looking. The wood inside was fresh, splintered hard, not worn or weak. It hadn't snapped under weight. It had been broken by force. Later that afternoon, while the house was distracted with police questions, Miss Marple wandered into Lady Eleanor's private sitting room. It was tidy, too tidy. Drawers shut, papers stacked, but one drawer, the writing desk, stood locked. The key was gone. A maid, young Elsie, nervously admitted she'd seen Harold leaving that room late the night before. "Just for a moment, miss," she whispered, but he looked frightened, proper frightened. That was useful, very useful. By evening, rain had stopped, leaving the ground soaked and heavy with mist. Miss Marple took a slow walk through Briarwood Wood behind the hall, where the earth was soft enough to keep secrets badly. There she found footprints, deep ones, a man's shoes by the look of them, fresh from the night before. They led her to the old Vale family crypt. Inside, among dust and cracked stone, she found something half-burnt beneath a loose brick, Lady Eleanor's new will, the edges blackened, the middle untouched, and there it was in plain writing, everything left to Clara, not Harold, not a penny for him. Miss Marple folded the paper carefully, but something else caught her eye. On the stone wall beside the loose brick was a streak of black paint, still tacky to the touch. Fresh. Strange, because there was no reason for fresh paint in a crypt. When she returned to Briarwood Hall, the place was in uproar. Clara was gone. Her room was empty, her bed untouched, her coat still hanging by the door. No one had seen her leave, no one had heard a thing. But sitting neatly in the middle of her pillow was a single black rose, wet with rain, and pinned beneath it a note. 3 words. She knows too much. Chapter 3. The Last Secret of Briarwood Hall. The storm returned that night, harder than before. Wind battered the ancient windows of Briarwood Hall, and somewhere deep in the house a loose shutter kept slamming again and again, like the beat of a nervous heart. Nobody slept much, not after Clara vanished, not after the note. Inspector Graves ordered every room searched from cellar to attic, but the hall seemed endless in the dark, all narrow corridors and locked doors, as though the place itself wanted to hide the truth. Miss Marple sat quietly beside the drawing-room fire, knitting with slow hands, while everyone else rushed about in panic. To most people she looked calm, harmless even, but her mind was turning over every detail, every glance, every careless word spoken since her arrival. The broken cane, the burnt will, the black paint. And one thing that troubled her more than all the others. Lady Eleanor had not looked frightened of death. She had looked frightened of someone she knew very well. Near midnight, Miss Marple asked Inspector Graves for a lantern and made her way alone to the west corridor, where the old family portraits hung in silence beneath dusty lamps. She stopped before the largest painting in the hall, a towering portrait of Lord Vale himself, dressed in hunting red, his cold eyes staring across the room. Then she noticed it. The frame had been disturbed recently, very slightly, crooked, just as Lady Eleanor had said. Miss Marple reached behind the painting and felt a hidden latch. A small compartment opened inside the wood, empty, but not completely. A smear of black paint marked the wood inside, the same paint from the crypt. At once she understood. The person searching the hall had been hunting for something hidden behind that portrait, something Lady Eleanor had moved before her death, something worth killing for. Footsteps suddenly echoed down the corridor, heavy footsteps. Harold. He stopped dead when he saw Miss Marple standing beside the portrait, lantern light flickering across her face. For one brief second his expression cracked. Fear, real fear. Then came anger. "You've no business snooping about this house," he snapped. Miss Marple gave a small smile. On the contrary, Mr. Vale, I think your aunt invited me for precisely that reason." Harold stepped forward sharply, but Inspector Graves appeared from the shadows before he could say another word. The inspector had suspected him already. Now he watched carefully as Harold's eyes darted toward the hidden compartment. That was enough. Within the hour, the truth began to split open. Clara was discovered locked inside the abandoned East Tower room, shaken but alive. Someone had trapped her there after she found Lady Eleanor's ledger hidden in the old nursery fireplace. The ledger contained years of accounts, debts, and missing estate money, large sums, quietly stolen over time. By Harold. Gambling debts had ruined him. Everyone in the village knew he drank too much, but nobody realized how desperate he'd become. Lady Eleanor had discovered the theft only weeks earlier. She changed her will immediately, cutting him out entirely, and leaving Briarwood Hall to Clara instead. Harold panicked. On the night of the storm, he waited near the staircase landing while Lady Eleanor climbed the stairs with her candle and cane. He grabbed the cane during the struggle and snapped it violently, throwing her balance. At her age, one hard shove was enough. She fell all the way down, and Harold watched her die. But even then, Miss Marple knew there was one final piece missing, because of the note in the diary. "Harold is not the one I fear most." That sentence lingered in her mind like smoke. The answer came suddenly as Dr. Fenwick entered the drawing-room after Harold's arrest. The doctor looked pale, too pale, and on his sleeve, barely visible beneath the lamplight, was a tiny streak of black paint. Miss Marple looked up slowly. "You helped him, didn't you, Doctor?" The room fell silent. Fenwick's face collapsed at once. Years of guilt seemed to pour out of him in a single breath. Harold had stolen the money, yes, but the doctor had forged medical papers for Lady Eleanor's late husband many years ago. Lord Vale had not died accidentally in the woods at all. He had discovered the theft first, and someone silenced him. Lady Eleanor had learned the truth only recently. She feared Harold for the money, but she feared Dr. Fenwick for murder. The old doctor sank into a chair, trembling. "I never meant for any of it to happen," he whispered, but it had already happened. By dawn, police lanterns glowed across Briarwood Hall, and the long nightmare that haunted the estate finally began to lift. The servant spoke again, windows opened, the terrible silence faded from the corridors. Yet as Miss Marple prepared to leave that morning, she paused at the front gates and looked back at the hall one last time. Old houses remembered things, and Briarwood Hall, she thought, would remember blood for a very long time. If you enjoyed this mystery, subscribe for more dark secrets, hidden killers, and Miss Marple mysteries where nothing is ever quite what it seems, because the next house may already have a body waiting behind its locked door.